Weedflower Chapter 2. When Auntie finished bathing, Sumiko went out for her turn. To keep the water clean for as many days as possible, they all washed themselves off with sponges, soap, and a bucket of water before they got into the tub. By the time Sumiko bathed, both the water and the air had cooled off. Sumiko could not remember ever taking a hot bath in a nice, steamy room. She got undressed and sponged off. She always checked the scars on her tummy from the car accident her parents had been killed in so many years earlier. She didn't remember much about it except spinning around. She climbed into the tub and swooshed her whole head and body under the water. The water pressed softly against her face. She had a thought and sat up quickly. She should bring some flowers to the party. Someday, when she achieved her goal of owning a flower shop, she would be an expert in arranging flowers. She loved to create arrangements for the dining room table. Sometimes she liked an orderly arrangement, and sometimes she liked something wilder. Now she decided to bring a bunch of peach stock to the party. Everyone would love the scent and the wildness of the flowers. She held her breath and dunked underneath the water again. When she lifted her head, she could feel a breeze from a crack in the wall. She stepped into the chilly air, dried off quickly, and went inside without draining the tub. It was her job to decide when to empty the tub and put fresh water. Auntie didn't like to waste water, so sometimes Sumiko kept the same water all week. On the farm, they all had their farm duties, and in general, they didn't like to tell one another how to do their jobs. Once in a while, someone would say casually, within hearing, "The bath water is getting a little stale," or, "I wonder when Sumiko will change the bath water." Today, the water was definitely getting a little musty, but not quite musty enough to change. That night, Sumiko couldn't focus on any of the chatter during dinner. The grown-ups seemed obsessed with someone named Mrs. Sumiko Hata, whose brother and husband had suffered heart attacks within days of each other, which resulted in Mrs. Hata's son taking over their Oregon potato farm, which started a chain reaction that ended in the previously wealthy Hata family nearly going broke and thereby providing gossip for Nikki all up and down the coast. Nikki were anyone in America of Japanese descent, whether they were born in the United States or Japan. Sumiko had never met Mrs. Hata, and neither had her family. Jishan liked to say that Sumiko's head was divided in half, the half that liked to work and the half that liked to daydream. As everyone ate and chatted, she started daydreaming about what kind of cake Miss Marcia Melrose would serve at her party. Sumiko's most favorite cake ever was the strawberry cake that Mrs. Muramoto had served one year at the Muramoto's annual New Year's Day party. If Marcia's mother served strawberry cake, she wasn't sure whether it would be considered rude to ask for a second slice. Her mind snapped back to the table when she heard Ichiro say, "A friend of mine thinks that the U.S. government may execute all the Nikki if war with Japan breaks out." Sumiko had heard that rumor before, but Uncle had admonished her not to believe it. He said only crazy people believe that. Still, she couldn't stop herself from asking, "Which friend?" Some of Ichiro's friends had been to college, so they were really smart. Ichiro started to answer, but Auntie cut him off. No war talk at the dinner table. It was all really complicated, and things changed constantly. But as far as Sumiko understood, Nazi Germany had taken over France, Yugoslavia, Greece, Austria, and some other countries. And Germany had bombed England and then attacked the Soviet Union. Or else attacked the Soviet Union and then bombed England. Or maybe did them both at once? And Ichiro said the United States had imposed an oil embargo on Japan, who had signed a pact with Germany and Italy. And this was all just off the top of Sumiko's head. There was a lot more going on. The world was a huge mess. But the United States was officially neutral, and Ichiro had read somewhere that more than 90% of Americans opposed getting involved in the war. So Sumiko assumed there would be no war, and she could continue to work on her flowers until things settled down. Every day she looked at the peaceful flower fields and sat in school learning social studies and math and music, and slept in her warm bed, and she just couldn't believe that the United States would ever get involved in a war. Ichiro looked at his watch. He went out a lot, but Auntie always insisted he stay until dinner was finished. Ichiro was a dandy. He'd already gotten ready to go out, which meant he'd smeared grease through his hair. Sumiko could smell it from where she was sitting across the table. And he was actually wearing gold suspenders a girlfriend had made him. Tee-hee! He liked girls and gambling, and he spent a lot of his money on clothes. Sumiko couldn't imagine why girls would like gold suspenders and greasy hair. Still, she had to admit it suited Ichiro. But he was just as handsome in overalls. Bull's hair was a big mess, like it always was after his bath. Before his bath, his hair was usually a small mess. He did try to comb it in the mornings, but the combing didn't take, because his hair was bristly as a horse brush. Sumiko often marveled over how different Ichiro and Bull were. Bull didn't even pick out his own clothes. Auntie made him overalls and shirts. He rarely went out for fun, except when he played baseball with the other Nikki. He did have a girlfriend a couple of years ago, but Sumiko didn't know what had become of that. Ichiro, on the other hand, went out with girls all the time. But the point was, Ichiro knew a lot of people and heard all the important rumors. One rumor, that was not a rumor, last August, a U.S. congressman had suggested that 10,000 Japanese Americans ought to be incarcerated and held as hostages to make sure Japan would not act in a hostile manner toward the United States. Sumiko remembered when they'd all heard that on the radio. Auntie had exclaimed, "Law-abiding citizens held hostage?" The grown-ups had discussed that for weeks. Sumiko did not believe it was possible. White people treated her fairly enough. In fact, there was a lady at the grocery store who gave her a free apple once. Sumiko swallowed some rice. "A white lady gave me an apple once," she said. Everybody just looked at her uncomprehendingly. "Mother, I need to get going," Ichiro said. Auntie said, "We're almost finished." They frowned at each other. Jishan took out his teeth and looked at them and put them back in. Sumiko moved her eyes to Auntie to see her reaction. Auntie laid the palm of her right hand softly against her heart, as if she were having a mild attack. Jishan didn't notice. He went back to attacking his food, slurping a piece of meat into his mouth as if it were a noodle. Jishan's lean face fascinated Sumiko. If she hadn't known him, she would think he was angry all the time. His cheekbones jutted out, and he scowled even when he was joking. He'd come to America because he was a second son. Among the Japanese, a father left everything he owned to his first son. So Jishan had always struggled for money, and some people thought he was bitter. But Sumiko was glad he was a second son, because otherwise he never would have come to America, and she and Tak-Tak would have never been born in Japan. Now he took out his teeth again and studied them as if they were a crystal ball. "Someday Bull be as strong as I once was," he predicted. He put his teeth back in. Sumiko and Tak-Tak giggled. Food splattered out of Tak-Tak's mouth as he tried to hold back full laughter. Auntie looked at Uncle, which meant that Uncle was supposed to say something. Uncle finally came up with, "Children, no giggling at the table." Auntie frowned at Tack-Tack, and Jishan frowned at Auntie. Uncle and Auntie were in their late 40s, and their faces were lined and dark from working in the fields all their lives. But Uncle smiled more than Auntie. Auntie did not have a sense of humor, or at least that's what Jishan said, when they were cross with each other one day. All during dinner, Sumiko's legs swung and shook with impatience. She wanted to finish so she could study her dresses. Toward the end of dinner, even Auntie seemed impatient. The whole family watched Jishan chew slowly. Dinner was never over until he stopped chewing. Every time he seemed about to stop, he would frown thoughtfully at the table and refill his plate. Finally, he frowned thoughtfully at the table and didn't fill his plate. He pushed his chair back and looked warmingly at everyone. "Need digestive peace now." He ambled away, no doubt to sit in his chair and digest. After Sumiko washed the dishes, she rushed to her bedroom so she could study her dresses. Her crisp blue dress had only been worn once, but her mint green school dress was her favorite dress ever. And once when she was wearing it, the boy who worked at the grocery store had said it was pretty. She pulled the blanket divider closed so she could think about the dresses in private. If she'd had a mirror, she would have tried them on. But when she heard Tack-Tack climb into his bed, she went around to tuck him in. He lay in bed with his glasses on and his cage of pet crickets on his pillow. "Can I take off your glasses?" she said. "But what if I get up in the middle of the night and can't see anything?" That was a big fear of his lately. "I'll be right here." "Okay," he said reluctantly. He sat up, and she took off his glasses. Whenever she took them off, a ridge from the band jutted out from his hair. "I'm putting them right here on the nightstand," she said. "Uh-huh." He pulled his blanket over his head without saying good night. "Do you want me to put the crickets on the table?" "Okay." She set the cage on the table. "They're right here," she said. He didn't answer. Sumiko turned off his light. Then, after she got in bed, he called out to her. "Do you think they'll kill us if war breaks out?" His voice was muffled, so she knew he still lay under his blanket. "Uncle will protect us." "Are you sure?" "Yes." And she was sure. She'd heard similar rumors for almost as long as she could remember. She trusted Uncle a lot. He wouldn't let anything happen to them. Sumiko looked out the window. In the fields, the tattered pieces of cheesecloth rippled like ghosts. Far away, she could see the flower fields of their neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Ono. Mr. Ono believed in the future, and he liked to say that inventions were the foundation of the future. His own newest invention? Lights he'd hung over his field to try to force some chrysanthemums to bloom early. Other farmers used lights too, but he said his lights were special. He also had developed a special strain of chrysanthemums that was much in demand at the market. The lights twinkled like low-hanging stars above his fields. A few years ago, he had tried to keep his fields warm in the winter by burning tires. The smell reached all the way to Sumiko's house. Her family had needed to keep their windows closed the whole winter. Now Sumiko opened the windows to let the cool December air waft into the room. Tack-Tack's pet crickets chirped loudly, a sound Sumiko loved since crickets were good luck. The chirping seemed farther away than usual. Sumiko's mind was already drifting to thoughts of Saturday's party. The party was the only thing that seemed real. Marcia Melrose wasn't the most popular girl in class, but she was definitely popular. Sumiko could already imagine Marcia's house and how beautiful it would be. Marcia's father was a city councilman, and her mother was a real, true ex-ballerina. Originally, the Melrose fortune had come from a magic elixir that Marcia's great-grandfather had invented during the pioneer days. Jishan said it was not elixir, but a bunch of crock, only he pronounced it more like cluck. Sumiko lay back and pulled her blanket around her. The crickets chirped and chirped.